Hi everyone, in this video we're going to talk about how to farm Paragon. Now fair warning, this is going to be a fairly long and detailed video, but I guarantee you if you follow these steps and you watch the entire video, you can easily get to Paragon 3 or even 4,000 Paragon within one season, even if you can't play all day long. I'm going to show you how, so let's get into it, shall we? Now over the last week or so I have played primarily on this barbarian here, but even though I'm playing on a build and a class that's ranked D in terms of XP per hour, I'm still actually beating majority of players even playing the inner Mr. Gala in terms of XP gain per hour. And this is all done by efficiency. So if we look at something like the Paragon calculator here, you can see this is what I do in my barbarian. I do GR 105s in about a minute and a half, and my downtime is 10 seconds average per whiff. And I get more Paragon than most of these monk players by playing efficiently. Now efficiency sounds pretty easy, but it can be really hard to master. So for instance, if we look at this Paragon calculator here, this is what I'm doing on my barbarian right now. I'm doing 105s in a minute and a half, and I'm about 10-second average downtime after each whiff. Now what most people have is that they have a way longer average downtime. Let's say they don't have 10 seconds, they have something like 30. As you can see, the XP per hour just dropped dramatically. It went to 2.45 from 2.95. That is what I'm trying to get at. This average time spent in town is the major factor that's going to allow you to get more Paragon than you could before. So the first step in playing efficient is be prepared. So before the season even starts, you want to know what you're doing. You want to have a plan in terms of what build you're going to make. This could for instance be from the season journey, and then also what builds do you want to make in the future. So let's say for instance I start barbarian this season. I could see that my starter set would be Might of the Earth. So I would rush to get the season journey done, of course, as soon as possible, as any 6 piece will be a massive damage increase to not having any damage at all. So get this done and you can then start farming really. After that, I want to make a speed build. Now you should do this before the season even starts, by the way. You can either go to Maxwell here and look at some like guides or tier lists. You can of course also look at my YouTube channel. I have quite a few things, but basically you can go down here and look at what's look interesting, or you can go to the tier list and then go to Soul Experience tier list. This is usually where the best builds are in terms of farming XP. What you don't want to do is use the in-game leaderboards. The leaderboards in here show you the strongest builds in terms of pushing the highest, but these builds are usually very slow. For instance, a build like this would do high damage, sure, but the clear speed is terrible. So you want to go to Maxwell and then you want to look at these builds here. Now I know personally that I really like the Wind build, so I'm going to actually use the Raised Whirlwind build, even though it's in the D tier. I'm going to scroll down. I'm just going to ignore all this now. Of course, you should read this before the season starts. But what I'm looking for is the GR Solar Speed. This build here is what I want to make. The GR Solar Push and the Nephalem Whiffs are of course also important, and also Bounties, but those are for later. But right now I want to focus on GR Solar Speed build and making this as soon as I possibly can. So again, if we start this with the season journey, we start the Map of the Earth. We're going to use that, make the core initial setup for that, and then swap as soon as we can to the GR Solar Speed build that we have found that we want to play. And later in the video, I'm going to show you how I did this entire thing for season 25, so stay tuned for that. Now within Diablo 3, there are 3 game modes that you consider endgame. You have Great Rifts, you have Nephalem Rifts, and you have Bounties. You want to spend 90% of your time in Great Rifts. This is the only place where you can actually get XP. The XP in a GR is almost like 1,000 times more than it would be in normal Rift or a Bounty where you get nothing. So everything we're going to be doing is to maximize how many GRs we can do, how quick we can do them, and how high we can do them. GRs also is the only place where you can upgrade legendary gems. So I've been trapped here with a massive damage increase, and of course also making augments. GRs is also the place that's going to drop you the most gear per hour, which means getting the higher and higher chance for good ancients and primals. So how do we do these GRs efficiently, you may ask? Well, basically the first thing you want to do is you always want to try and make group. Now groups are really good because they allow you to go higher, so you can do higher Great Rifts. Let's say for instance you could do a 105 solo, but a group you can easily get up to, let's say, a 120 if you have a decent setup. And by that I mean you need to have support roles that buff damage and toughness. You need some kind of damage dealers, and if you go really high and you actually start pushing where the Whiff Guardian has a lot of health, like a 150, you also need a Whiff Guardian killer. You can of course also use something like Maxwell to find out what are the meta builds in terms of what are used for 4-man farming. And it is of course also way easier to get your main gems, so let's say 150 by doing a 4-man than you could do solo, as 4-mans is just way stronger and way more powerful, and usually also for speed clears they are also quicker. And it can of course also be more fun if you can go in and play some games with your friends. Now let me show you the amount of XP you get extra. Let's say we have the same level here that I showed before with my barbarian example. If I change the number of players from 1 player, look at this number, 295 to 3.3. So already there you're getting way more, and you can also probably go way higher. Let's say 120 or something. You'll get a lot more XP per hour because groups give more XP in general, and you can also go higher. Now let me show you quickly how you can do it GR efficiently. Now it doesn't matter what character you're playing or what build you're making. Any build can be really efficient as long as you optimize for it. Of course, just try and make a speed build and then find out where to go. The majority of extra time you can get or playing efficient is done by the end of the GR. Now, when you're playing Greatest, in terms of what defines a speed build, is usually what can clear GRs in about 2.5 to 3 minutes. Now, I'm playing a bit of a different build right now where I'm clearing about 1.5 to 2 minutes, but it varies depending on what builds you like and how you like them. I'm a pretty experienced player, so I can make this kind of build here, where it focuses more on going quick than going high. But normally, what you aim for is about 2.5 to 3 minute clears, which will be the most XP per hour. Now, I'm going to show you the really quick tip here. So I've just cleared this rift. We've killed the rift guardian. What we do is pick up everything that's of course on the ground. We then start upgrading our gems. Now, here's where the big important thing is. When you're upgrading gems, do not just stand there and upgrade all of them and then TP. While you're upgrading, while you're in about halfway through the second upgrade, I start TPing back. As you can see, it finished upgrading and I immediately come back. Now, if I would have stayed, upgraded all 4 levels and then TP, that would have taken about 2 to 3 seconds extra for that TP to finish. Now, you can imagine those 2 seconds might not matter now, but if I could do, let's say, 100 GRs in a day or over a weekend, those 2 seconds equals many more great rifts, which are basically just for free. Now we're back in town. The first thing you want to do while you have this, you got some gear, you got everything ready, right? We're not going to use the Book of Cain. We're not going to salvage. What you're going to do is use your movement speed ability. Almost every class has this, a charge or dash. Go over to the GR, close it with Auric, and then open a new one again. Once you get used to this, you can actually close the rift in about 1 second or 2 seconds after coming through the portal. This is one of the major reasons I see why newer players struggle in terms of farming Paragon, is that they like to spend time after each GR to look through all their items and then salvage everything and then start a new one. Every time you're playing this game should be done efficiently as possible. That means every second you're playing should be trying to be in a greater rift. That means every second you're playing should be done either in a greater rift or preparing for the next greater rift. Now let me show you again really quick what I mean in terms of TPing while upgrading. So while we're clicking, so halfway through when we see upgrade 3, we'll press our TP. As you can see, we are teleporting and we are now upgrading meanwhile. You can see the upgrade finishes and we go back immediately. Now here's also a very important part. As you can see, our inventory is pretty full, which means we can't do another GR instead of room for everything. But what we really want to do is we want to make room for a bit more gear so we can do a third GR. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over, we're going to go to a salvage bench. You don't want to click on the forge armor. You don't want to click on the guy because these will open up the repair, the forge. We don't want that. I was going to click the salvage anvil because that opens the salvage menu instantly. And another thing we were doing while we were upgrading the last few upgrades for our Linder gem within the Greater is I was looking at my gear. So I was looking at this gear and figuring out to myself, which of these items do I not need for any of my builds? I know that for my build right now and the builds I have, this chest piece could be an upgrade. What I do know is that these 5 items here are not used for any of the builds that I'm playing. So while upgrading your gems or while you're in town right now, we're going to go over and we just want to salvage a few items to make room for a third GR. So we're going to click salvage, we're going to click the item and we're going to click enter. We can just do this really quick, get rid of 4 to 5 items, and now we can then go again. So we go over to Auric, close the rift, and then do our third GR. Now we have just completed the third GR, and now it is time to do everything. We want to salvage, we want to gamble, and everything. So while teleporting the last time, I of course looked at my gear again and realized to myself which of these items I'm going to keep already just from the start. So I'm going to go to my stash, and the first stash within my stash is what I call a dump tab. So this is a dump tab where I dump everything that I might want to keep. So this is for instance where I could dump my bovine. I know I need those. I could also dump my Is of Anguish. We also got, of course, we're playing Scene 25. Now I want to dump those immediately because I know I'm going to keep them anyway. So there's no point in IDing them and looking at them right now. So we go over now and then we can ID everything. And now we simply just go over to the salvage and then we got start salvaging. Now before I even start salvaging, I know for a fact that 90% of these items are garbage. So there are only a few items over these I'm actually going to look at. I'm going to look at, for instance, the chest here and maybe also the cinder coat. But listen, these items are either things that we don't use at all, like a wildwood, or they're used for different builds, like the Mortal King that I don't play. So I don't have to look at 90% of these items here. You can see I just salvage them anyway. And yes, these might be ancient with really good stats, but I know for a fact that I don't use them for any of my builds. And of course, we also want to look at the items we were initially interested in, like this chest here and the cinder coat, but we can see they rolled non-ancient and they're not very good. So I'm just going to get rid of them anyway. And then we simply just want to close the rift and then we gamble everything and we rinse repeat. This is also really important to do when you're playing in a group. You basically want to agree, are you going to do 2 GRs or 3 GRs and then salvage and gamble? Because that is going to increase your efficiency by a huge margin. Also another example of the dump tab. Let's say I got these gloves here either from the GR itself or from gambling. doing, but I'm not sure if they're good or not. Unless they are a major upgrade that I can just see immediately, okay, I want this item on now, then I'm of course gonna roll it and put it on. But if I'm skeptical or I'm curious to see, can I use this for anything, I'm not gonna look at it anymore. I'm just gonna go over, open out the stash and put it into our dump stash. You always want to make sure the first tab in here is what you call your dump tab, where you can just put everything in that might be an upgrade that you can then look at by the end of the day or end of the farming session you're currently doing. This is also really good to do if you're playing groups and you don't want to slow your entire group down by looking at items that you might or may not need. Another thing we want to look at is pools. So I can tell you now, for 95% of players, you do not need to worry about XP pools at all. They are not worth it, especially not worth it to go out and farm for by looking for them. As you can see here, total XP from a great rift is 735, but if you have a pool, you have a 1.6 trillion. So you think to yourself, I don't want this for every GR, right? This is way more XP. This should be good. Well, yes and no, because it depends on how much time it takes you to get that extra pool. Within the time it usually takes to find a pool, you could have done maybe a GR or half a GR more, which would then make this number extra obsolete compared to what you can gotten extra from doing one extra GR. And also pool scales on percent XP needed. So for instance, if you're Paragon 1000, if you did one GR, you would probably use up an entire pool, if not multiple pools, by doing one GR, because you don't need a whole lot of experience per level at this point. But once you reach something like 3,000 or 4,000 Paragon, then pools actually become pretty good because you need more total XP. So therefore, even though you get the same percent number, the amount of extra XP, the total number of billions, will be higher. So unless you're 3k Paragon, do not worry about pools at all. Now what you can do is what I normally do. Even though if you're lower Paragon, let's say 2,000 Paragon, what you can do is find them within your T16 rift. You can have a total of 10 pools. So what I do is I go on my speed build, I farm 10 pools doing T16s, of course also giving me greater with keys that I'm mostly after. So let's say after 10 pools I've got maybe 50 keys or so, I can then swap over to my GR build again and then do GRs and use those pools up and then rinse repeat. That's a really good tactic, and you can do that even at lower Paragon levels. Let's say even 1,000, it will still be pretty good, but you might notice that you will use all your 10 pools in just 1 or 2 GRs, which I recommend. Normally only think about this strategy even if you're 2k Paragon or higher. So the Nephalem rifts, also called regular rifts, are what we farm for keys. So as I mentioned before, you want to spend about 80 to 90% of your time in GRs, and then most of the time outside of this should be done in Nephalem rift. This is a great source for every crafting materials, and of course also greater with keystones than we need for opening greater with. Now the crafting materials here, like usable parts, arcane dust, veil crystal, death breath, are used for recipe 3 within the cube, upgrade rare item. And it's a really good recipe to use within the entire season to get good upgrades, for instance for weapons or anything like that. Now while you're doing normal rifts to farm for keys and death breath, a really important thing is not picking up everything. You don't need to pick up every legendary items you find or see on the ground, as this will slow you down tremendously. You need to remember that the primary reason for you doing T16s is to get greater keys and also death breath. So I almost ignore every single item I find that drop unless it's from a goblin pack. Then I will of course pick them up. Now we've of course just killed the rift guard here and gotten of course our keys and all that. We're gonna pick that up and then we're gonna TP back. Now there are 2 ways of doing this efficient as possible. Of course, either as soon as you TP back, you go over, you close the rift, and then you of course can do everything you want to. Now you have 30 seconds to do everything you need to in terms of making yourself ready for the next one. So you can salvage everything you got, you can gamble for your blood shards, and basically just wait until 30 seconds and then you can go again. Now the other way of doing it is of course by after killing rift guardian is to teleport out and then closing the rift. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm gonna TP out. I have a timer ready here. Let me show you this. So instead of closing and waiting for a new one to be able to open, I'm gonna click leave game. I'm going to start the timer and I'm going to wait here. I'm going to see how long does it take to leave game and then start a new game. As you can see, the timer is just going here and we should be almost in there and almost there. Basically done. Now I did not start the timer at the millisecond I pressed leave game. I know that, but still, as you can see, this is way quicker than waiting for 30 seconds. Even if this was 15 seconds or 20 seconds, you're still going to save a mass amount of time by leaving and remaking. Of course, this depends if you have a good computer or not. But if you have a good computer, I highly advise always leaving the game and remaking it. I know you don't get the XP from closing the rift, but the amount of seconds you save from this is massive. And it's going to increase your GR keys per hour, which will then result in more greater stun and then will result in more Paragon. And also the more GS you can do will also result in more gear. So I do this strategy every time. I always leave the game and remake a new one. And by doing this, I get up to almost 200 keys per hour because I'm playing a very efficient build for T16 farming right now. And this build will of course be linked down below. And of course, to really maximize your rifts, of course, make sure you have the canes. This is just going to give you more GRs keys in total for free, which is really nice. And you can of course also give your follower the sage so you get double this breath. What you can do is have the 2-piece sage, the 2-piece canes, and then of course a ring of royal grandeur on your follower. and it'll give you everything. So I highly recommend doing that if you're playing solo. Now, if you're doing Nephalem rifts in a group, you want to make sure you always have what we call a closer. As soon as the rift guardian dies, you have the ability to close the rift, and you want someone ready to click him, so you can then start a 30-second timer to open the next one. So when the closer then clicks on Auric to close the rift, he wants over to the flags, and when the guy's already standing at the boss picking up loot, he clicks them, and it just teleports him to the rift guardian as well, and then he can pick up the DR keys. So while everyone is now picking up loot, the timer for 30 seconds is now going, which means you save multiple seconds every rift. And again, as we mentioned before, is a massive time saver. Now, the last thing for endgame is bounties. So bounties are a really efficient way of getting really good upgrades, where you can target specific items like a weapon or an amulet or jewelry piece. And I would highly recommend using your bind materials only for that. Do not use your bind materials for something like a chest piece or a pair of legs, where you can use blood shards that cost 25. So everything that costs 25 blood shards, maybe with the exception of something like a offhand, all of this you want to get with blood shards, and then you can use your bind materials for weapons, and then also of course for jewelry. Amulets are really important things, something like a scourge amulet or travelers. So everything that costs more than 50 blood shards, use your bind materials for that. And what I'm talking about is of course the recipe number 2 called the Reforge. So you use 5 of each material and then 50 forgotten souls, and then you can reforge, and you can get either the same item as non-ancient, primal, ancient, and this is by far the best way to target one specific item in terms of getting it with a good stat. However, you only want to do bounties at the start of a season and the end of a season. And why is that, you may ask? Because bounties give you nothing else except for bind materials and a few crafting materials, which means time you're spending in doing bounties is time not spending in Greater Rift, which means you don't get Paragon, you don't really get enough gear, and you also can't upgrade legendary gems for main gems and also for augments. Now, you can of course do a few bounties in case you want to extract some legendary powers from page 1, or if you're crafting gear. Let's say for instance you want to play with the Captain Crimson set that is used for the build you're playing. Of course you can farm materials to get a good ancient or primal for that. But when you're in the middle of the season, do not farm bind materials to try and get everything primal or good ancient with bind materials, because you never know, maybe the next day or the next week you're gonna find that item in a GR. So all the time you just spent farming bind materials to reroll for it is now a waste of time, and at that time you could have done more DRs for more gear and Paragon. So you can for instance see for me, I'm almost Paragon 4000 and have less than 250 bounties completed. You see a lot of people that are Paragon 600, 800 that have triple my bounties completed because they spent a lot of time in there instead of doing Greater Rift. So by cutting down on the time spent in bounties, you can then do more DRs, which equals to more Paragon and everything like that. Now, I'm not saying that bounties are bad. Bounties are exceptionally good, but bounties are there to get the last 1 or 2 pieces you need for an in-season push. They are not meant to gear out your entire character and with full primals and good ancients on day 1 or within the season. They are only there when you're missing that 1 or 2 items like a weapon or an amulet, where you want better stats for your in-season push. And of course, as always, if you're doing bounties, make sure you do them in a group. It's just gonna be way more efficient. It's 4 times faster. Any build can do it. You don't need Paragon to do it. So make sure you have a 4-man group for bounties. Now, another way that I get most of my bind materials throughout the entire season is actually with the challenge rift. So of course, every week we get a new challenge rift, and there's usually some kind of random build that doesn't really function that well. But the good thing about challenge rift is it usually takes less than 5 minutes, and you then get all the materials. So that means with 5 minutes here, you can then craft or you can reforge or whatever you want to every week by doing the challenge rift. So it's really, really efficient for the time spent. So if you can get to end season push where 90% of the bind materials has been from the challenge rift only, I can promise you, you're gonna get so much more Paragon and gear while playing the game. So to quickly sum it up, before the season even starts, you want to have a plan. You want to have a plan in terms of what build are you gonna get from the season journey, and you want to find a build guide that works so you can make this build as quick, as efficient as possible, even early game. And you also want to have a second build ready that you can then switch to when you want to play that. So basically the build you're after for doing the speed DRs. So that means, let's say for monk this time around, you got this Sun Wukong. I would play this Sun Wukong. I would get that build going with a full build guide for it, to the point where I can basically spam DRs. Let's say I could spam 80s, and then I just want to farm gear and everything for it. Of course, also want to unlock primals by doing my first DR 70 solo, and then you're just onto farming really, DRs and normal rifts, and a few bounties here and there to get a few crafting materials to make, for instance, Captain Crimson's, or to extract powers, or also of course if you want to get an ancient weapon, using recipe 2 is also quite good, especially if you have a group ready for it. So it's all about efficiency. If you can save 1 to 2 seconds on every task you're doing, even when it comes to closing a rift, getting ready to start a new DR, or even while teleporting back to town in a great rift, all of these seconds saved will result in hundreds of extra great rifts you can do within an entire season while you're still just playing the game. You don't have to play for 8 hours a day, you just get more value from the time spent. Now I'm going to give you a concrete example of how I did this for season 25. I got to Paragon 1100 on the first day doing solo self-found hardcore. So for almost any character, as soon as you hit 70, you want to focus on your season journey. You want to get the full 6-piece here. So by focusing on the season journey even from an early start, I was able to get high Paragon when the first day of the season. So as you can see on the screen now, we are about 3.5 hours into the season. That means with leveling, and I'm now finished the season journey and I have all the 6 pieces now. And this is done solely by focusing on completing it as quick as possible. So now that we have the full 6-piece like this, our damage has just increased tremendously. Basically taking us from a Torment 4 build all the way up to probably a Torment 10 straight away, and then we get a lot more gear from that. So after getting the full 6-piece, what I focused on was a combination of doing normal whiffs and greater whiffs. So I'd do about 5 normal whiffs to get keys and death breath, and then I would jump over to doing more greater whiffs to get more loot drop, but also to get the guaranteed greater whiff gems, and of course also to level these gems here. So I have the full basic setup for the impale here. We have the 6-piece, we have the Carlos point, and we have holy point shot. So what I focused on here was getting the full impale set done first, so I can then start farming efficiently. And then later on I can transition over to the Marauder, cluster arrow, or multi-shot for a build with more damage. And of course also did my DR70 quite early on. We are about 5.5 hours into the season. I'm doing my DR70 solo quite easily. And I did this by focusing on this build here. I try to get the main upgrades that I can. So whenever you're playing a build early on, you always want to make sure you know what you want to get. For instance, on this character here, it means upgrading rare daggers to get an ancient weapon. And it also means looking at your gear quite often to figure out where you can get the biggest upgrade. That means where can you get the most crit damage, the more crit chance. Those are usually the best options. So on this build here, I focus mainly on getting a good quiver and then also good gloves and shoulders. Now the power spike we got from the 6-piece, I was able to get up to about DR 80 really quickly, and then we kind of stalled. Not really in damage, but our toughness was not good enough to go higher than 80 really, where we could still play efficiently. And it was of course also on hardcore. But at this point, when you're this early on in the season, it's all about just making sure you're doing what is most efficient. That means you want to keep swapping between normal whiffs and greater whiffs, and doing maybe about 5 or so whiffs, and then go over to GRs again and use all your keys. By this, you're able to get enough death breath to upgrade for weapons, and you can still get a good amount of blood shards, and also upgrade your legendary gems from greater whiffs. And it's also really important, this is not just for early season, but to play efficiently. You want to make sure you don't have a lot of downtime in town just standing around. You want to be in a rift or a great rift at all times really. Now what I focused on most seasons is being prepared. I want to know what builds I'm making to start with, and then what builds I want to transition to over time. So for instance, I knew here I was getting impale with the season journey, but I knew I wanted to make a God 6 build for early T farming like I'm doing now. And I also want to make the Marauder build for multi-shot for farming greater rifts. So by already having the plan in mind, I was able to focus on these goals while playing the impale build early on. That means whenever I found items that were used for the builds, I would of course save them. And I could also focus on also getting the gems early for those builds. That means, for instance, upgrading the Enforcer gem early on. Even if I'm not playing the build right now for it, it's still very good to have it ready when I want to swap to that build. So what you see now is me playing the God build for just farming quick tier 70s. I have played the impale and also perfected the gear quite a bit, and I have everything set up for the impale. And I've played that build for quite a few hours now. And after I got the full set for the impale, I then spent all my time and effort trying to transition over to the Marauder multi-shot. The only thing I needed now was a few more pieces of gear and then upgrading some gems. So I made this build for just doing some really quick GRs so I can get those out of the way, and I could then make the Marauder build. A quick note is that early on you really want to make sure you use the cube. For instance, using the recipe 4 to get the remaining items that you need. For me, for instance, that means I just turned a pair of gloves into the chest piece that I needed. You want to make sure you really use the recipe 4 early on, so you can always get the items that you're after. And of course, always make sure you are rolling your gear, since the stats are really important. You want to make sure you of course get something like the damage stats on the gloves, and also of course defensive stats are really important for most pieces of gear. Now of course, don't spend 10 minutes rolling one piece of gear and using all your materials, but just get it to about 90% there. You can usually get there by just a few rolls. So this is now the first rift I did on my Marauder build, and as you can see, it is just super high damage and it's able to blast really quickly. So at this point, we're about 8 hours into the season, and I have 3 finished builds. We have the impale, we have the God 6 for doing T16s, and now we also have the Marauder build. We were able to do this because we were focused on building all of them, and we knew exactly before the season even started what builds we wanted and what items we also were after. And as you can see here, of course, we have now transitioned to other build, so you want to try and get a really good weapon for this build as well. That means, of course, upgrading with the recipe 3 to get the ancient yanks recurve. Now, early on, when you have the full build, it's almost always the best option to use your best breath to upgrade weapons, as there's the biggest damage increase for you. And as you can see, we have just made them a water build. We've been playing it for about half an hour or so, and we're already blasting GR 92s in just 2 to 3 minutes. Now, of course, it's really important early on to do your speeds, but you also want to make sure that you're upgrading for main gems. So I'm currently doing 92s, which are pretty quick as well, but it also makes sure that I can upgrade my main gems really easily since they are not very high level yet. And early on, while you're still getting upgrades quite often and you know what you're going after, your damage increases a lot. As you can see, we're doing 100s on the first day, and we're not even Paragon 800, and we can still do 100 GRs in 2.5 minutes. It's all about priority. Always want to make sure that you're going after correct items for your build currently. By doing this, you can actually start farming really high grades on even the first day of the season. And of course, you always want to focus on getting good weapons. And all the items that have something like crit chance or crit damage, so being gloves or jewelry, those are always going to be the most important pieces because they give a ton of damage. So to sum it up, before the season even starts, you want to have a plan. You want to know what items you want to get, what builds you want to make. So for me, I know personally for the Demon Hunter, I was going to get the Impale set. So already before it even started, I of course make sure I had a build made for it and planned out. You can always just use Maxwell or my channel here to get ideas. And I focused mainly on getting a speed build for the Impale done really quickly. And we also had a plan for leveling. You want to get to 1 to 70 in a nice and efficient way, of course. And then once we hit 70, we focus solely on getting the season journey done to get the 6-piece early on. After getting the 6-piece, we then focused on getting the remaining items we needed to make that build work. That means we needed the things for the cube and we needed the weapons and quiver. So after we had made that initial build and we got the 6-piece and the weapons, we were able to farm about GR 80s or so. So we farmed this for quite a few hours, making sure we got some good gear, some decent upgrades, and some good defensive stats as well, because we are playing hardcore. And we basically tried to play as efficient as possible. That means we did about 5 normal whiffs, and then we swapped over and did all the GRs we could for those keys we had. By doing this strategy, we were able to upgrade as many things from Desperate as possible, and then also upgrade legendary gems from the graders we then completed. So by doing this, we slowly but surely gained Paragon, more gear, and more overall damage, until we were then ready to transition over to the build we were really after, being the Marauder multi-shot. So it all basically boils down to having a game plan before the season even starts, and of course following that plan, but also being able to adjust to the plan if it didn't pan out. So after all those steps, you are now ready for what we call Endgame. And this is where you're going to use the tactics I just showed you now in terms of doing rifts and great rifts and saving every second you possibly can. This means that when you're not in early season anymore, do not do the same strategy of farming, let's say 5 numbers and then all the keys and use all those. What I typically do is I would farm 200 keys and then use all those for GRs, because swapping between 2 builds is also inefficient, right? But as I mentioned about pools, let's say you are 2000 Paragon or above, you can then start doing the tactic of doing enough rifts until you get 10 pools, and then you swap over and do graves again after that. And it's also quite fun because you get to change it up and play different builds quite often. Now Paragon in this game is actually getting completely out of hand. There's kind of like 7 or 8 people actually Paragon 20,000 in the game right now. And I have a full video about this explaining how they did this and why it is so powerful. And I highly recommend checking out this video and link in here, as I basically show how all these guys are meant to get 20,000 Paragon, which is just ludicrous. So I hope you enjoyed this long video. If you did, make sure to leave a like on the video as it really helps out. You can also subscribe for future content, and I also stream daily over on Twitch TV. My link will be down below, and I hope these tips really help you out, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out, everyone.